Ryan Hayes knew something was wrong before he reached the table. The private dining room occupied the 42nd floor of a Manhattan hotel, with glass walls overlooking the city and only 12 seats arranged around a polished walnut table. This was not supposed to be complicated. Hayes Capital wanted a strategic partnership with Sterling Holdings, and Ryan had spent 3 months preparing for the meeting. At 29, he had already learned that being the alpha heir to a financial empire meant entering every room as if nothing could surprise him. Then he saw Evan Brooks sitting across from his assigned chair. Ryan stopped for half a second. Evan looked exactly like the man Ryan had kissed goodbye that morning before leaving for work, because he was that man. His secret boyfriend of 11 months was sitting with the Sterling delegation. Evan wore a charcoal suit Ryan had never seen before. His light brown hair was neatly styled, his expression composed, and a leather portfolio rested in front of him beside a glass of water. Nothing about him resembled the junior financial analyst Ryan believed would be spending tonight finishing reports at Hayes Capital. Ryan's father, William Hayes, continued toward the table without noticing his son's hesitation. "Ryan, you remember Charles Sterling?" Ryan forced his attention toward the silver-haired man rising from the opposite side. "Of course. Good evening, Mr. Sterling." They shook hands. Introductions moved around the table. Attorneys, investment advisors, 2 Sterling board members. Ryan heard every name without absorbing any of them because Evan was less than 8 feet away. Their eyes met. Evan's expression did not change, but he gave the smallest possible shake of his head. "Do not say anything." Ryan understood immediately. He just did not understand why. "And I believe you have not formally met Mr. Brooks," Charles Sterling said. Ryan looked at Evan. For 11 months, he had known how Evan took his coffee, which old movies made him laugh, and why he always called his mother on Sunday evenings. Ryan knew Evan hated expensive restaurants because servers treated him differently when they recognized Ryan. He knew Evan kept an extra umbrella beside his apartment door because Ryan always forgot his. Yet now a man from Sterling Holdings was introducing them as strangers. Evan stood and extended his hand. "Ryan Hayes." His voice was perfectly professional. Ryan stared at the offered hand for one dangerous second before taking it. "Evan Brooks." The handshake lasted exactly as long as etiquette required. Nothing more. Evan sat down. Ryan took the chair opposite him and discovered that the evening had somehow become more difficult than any negotiation he had prepared for. Dinner began with market projections and expansion strategy. Ryan contributed when necessary, but his attention kept returning to small details that no longer made sense. Nobody asked Evan to take notes. Nobody explained the documents to him. When Charles Sterling wanted an opinion on the proposed voting structure, he turned directly to Evan. "What do you think?" Evan glanced at the numbers. "Hayes is assuming Sterling will accept a 12% limitation on minority voting rights. We should not." Silence followed. Ryan's father raised an eyebrow. Evan continued calmly. "The structure protects Hayes during the first phase, but it creates an imbalance after year 3. Adjust the threshold to 15% and add an independent review provision. Both sides get protection without giving either company permanent leverage." Ryan knew that analysis was correct. More unsettling. It was the kind of observation usually expected from someone several levels above Evan's supposed position. William leaned slightly toward Ryan. "Your analyst is impressive." Ryan kept his expression neutral. Apparently, Evan looked down at his portfolio. For the next 40 minutes, Ryan watched the man he loved become someone he had never met. Sterling executives listened when Evan spoke. Attorneys handed documents to him before circulating them to others. Charles occasionally asked for Evan's approval with nothing more than a glance. Ryan felt less angry than disoriented. 11 months of memories began rearranging themselves. Evan avoiding questions about extended family. Evan refusing expensive gifts. Evan understanding corporate succession law far better than any analyst needed to. Evan once saying that powerful families could make a person feel like property if he let them. Ryan had assumed Evan meant his experience working around people like the Hayes family. Now he was no longer certain. The main course was cleared shortly after 9. Charles announced a 15-minute break before final discussions. Ryan stood immediately. Evan remained seated. "Mr. Brooks," Ryan said, careful to keep his tone formal, "could I speak with you about the voting model?" Evan looked up. Everyone at the table heard an ordinary business request. Only Evan could hear the question beneath it. Of course. They walked into a quiet corridor outside the dining room. Ryan waited until the door closed. What are you doing here? Evan glanced toward the security camera at the end of the hallway. I cannot explain everything yet. You work for Hayes Capital? Yes. You told me you were working tonight. I am working tonight. Ryan stared at him. That is your answer? Evan lowered his voice. Ryan, please trust me for another hour. I have trusted you for 11 months. Something flickered across Evan's face. I know. Then tell me who you are. Before Evan could answer, the dining room door opened. A sterling attorney stepped into the corridor carrying a sealed folder. Mr. Brooks, they are ready for you. Evan nodded. Ryan noticed the attorney was not speaking to Evan like a junior employee. He was speaking to him with deference. Evan returned to the room, leaving Ryan in the corridor with more questions than answers. When Ryan sat down again, a new document had been placed at every seat. Evan's copy was different. A small embossed sterling crest appeared at the top, and beneath it was a signature line Ryan could read from across the table. The name printed there was not simply Evan Brooks. Ryan looked up sharply. Evan met his eyes. This time he did not look away. 11 months earlier, Ryan Hayes first noticed Evan Brooks because Evan was the only person in the elevator who did not seem impressed by him. It was 8:15 on a rainy Monday morning at Hayes Capital headquarters in Midtown Manhattan, and Ryan had already endured 3 conversations about quarterly projections before reaching the lobby. When the elevator doors opened, 5 employees immediately straightened. Evan did not. He stood near the back holding a paper coffee cup and reading something on his phone. He wore a simple navy suit, a white shirt, and no expensive watch. Ryan stepped inside. 34, please, Evan said without looking up. Ryan pressed the button. Thank you. Only then did Evan glance at him. Recognition appeared in his green eyes, followed by absolutely nothing. No nervous smile. No sudden apology. No attempt to introduce himself to the alpha heir whose family name was displayed in polished steel 20 feet above the lobby entrance. Ryan found that unexpectedly refreshing. New, he asked. Evan looked at him. Is it that obvious? You asked me to press 34. And existing employees have evolved beyond elevator buttons. Ryan almost smiled. Existing employees usually recognize me before asking. Evan finally studied his face. Ryan Hayes. That sounds less like a greeting when you say it. I was confirming a fact. The doors opened on 34. Evan stepped out, then turned back. For what it is worth, thank you for pressing the button, Mr. Hayes. Ryan watched the doors close and realized he was smiling. He learned Evan's name later that afternoon. Junior financial analyst, 25 years old, recently transferred into the strategic research division. His resume was strong but deliberately unremarkable. Ryan told himself he had looked because senior leadership should know promising employees. He stopped believing that excuse after their 3rd accidental meeting. The second happened in the company coffee shop when Evan discovered the machine had given him plain coffee instead of the latte he ordered. Ryan was waiting behind him. Corporate tragedy? Ryan asked. Evan examined the cup. I am considering whether this qualifies for an internal investigation. I know people. That is exactly what worries me. Ryan laughed. The 3rd meeting happened after 7 one evening, when most of the floor had emptied. Evan was studying a market report. In a conference room, Ryan passed the open door, noticed 3 pages covered in handwritten notes, and stopped. You disagree with it. Evan looked up. With what? The acquisition forecast. I did not say that. Your face did. Evan hesitated before turning the report toward him. The forecast assumes customer retention remains above 86% after consolidation. That is optimistic. Ryan entered the room. How optimistic? Enough that I would not build a $200 million decision around it. Ryan pulled out the chair opposite him. 20 minutes later, they were still talking. Evan's analysis was precise, but what interested Ryan more was that Evan challenged him without performing confidence for attention. When Ryan disagreed, Evan asked why. When Ryan made a stronger argument, Evan changed his position. When Evan was right, he did not celebrate it. By the time they noticed the hour, nearly everyone else had gone home. Have you eaten? Ryan asked. Evan glanced at the clock. Not since lunch. There is a diner 3 blocks away. Evan raised an eyebrow. Are you inviting an employee to dinner? I am inviting someone who just spent 20 minutes explaining why my forecast is wrong to defend his argument over a cheeseburger. That sounds suspiciously like unpaid overtime. I will buy the cheeseburger. Evan considered him, then smiled. Fine. Dinner became coffee 3 days later. Coffee became a Saturday walk through Central Park. Neither called it a date until Ryan finally asked the question beside the reservoir. Are we pretending this is professional? Evan looked amused. Were we ever convincing? Ryan laughed. Not especially. Evan's expression softened. Then no, I do not think we are. Ryan had dated before, but his surname usually entered the relationship before he did. With Evan, the Hayes name seemed almost irrelevant. Evan never asked about private jets, family properties, or introductions to influential people. When Ryan offered to send a car after a late dinner, Evan took the subway home instead. When Ryan suggested an expensive restaurant for their next evening together, Evan chose a neighborhood Italian place with 12 tables and handwritten specials. The more Ryan tried to understand him, the more Evan seemed determined to live without being defined by status. One night, as they walked along the Hudson River, Ryan asked about Evan's family. Evan became quiet. My mother raised me mostly on her own, he said. What about the rest of them? Complicated. Ryan recognized the boundary and did not push. Evan looked toward the river. Powerful families can make you forget your life belongs to you. Ryan stopped walking. That sounds strangely specific. Evan gave him a small smile. Maybe I have spent too much time around people like you. Ryan accepted the answer. Months later, he would remember that moment and realize Evan had never actually lied. Ryan had simply heard the answer he expected. That evening, however, he knew only that he wanted to see Evan again. And Evan, despite knowing exactly what the Hayes name could mean for his own hidden future, wanted the same thing. By the third month, Ryan stopped pretending he and Evan were simply seeing where things went. Evan had become the person Ryan called after difficult board meetings, the person who could tell from a single word whether Ryan needed advice or 5 minutes of silence, and the only person who seemed completely uninterested in treating his alpha status as either a privilege or a warning. Their relationship developed quietly, almost naturally, but secrecy entered it before either man intended. The first warning came when Ryan and Evan left their favorite Italian restaurant in Greenwich Village and saw a financial reporter standing across the street. Evan immediately stepped several feet away. Ryan understood why, but he hated how quickly the distance appeared. Later that night, in Evan's apartment, Ryan asked the question they had both avoided. Are we hiding? Evan looked up from the coffee he was making. Do you want people to know? I want you to know I am not ashamed of this. That is not what I asked. Ryan leaned against the kitchen counter. If my family finds out, they will investigate you. Evan became still. Investigate me how? Everything. Family. Finances. Employment history. Anyone you have ever worked for. My father calls it protecting the company. Evan looked down at his cup. That sounds exhausting. It is. Then maybe we keep this private. Ryan studied him. Private is different from secret. Exactly. Evan met his eyes. Private, not shameful. That became their rule. At Hayes Capital, Ryan remained the alpha heir expected to eventually succeed William Hayes, while Evan remained a junior analyst whose work occasionally reached senior management without attracting attention to the man behind it. They did not arrive together. They did not leave together. Inside the office, Ryan never gave Evan assignments directly unless another manager was present. Outside it, they built a life from small things nobody else could see. Sunday morning coffee. Grocery shopping after 8 in the evening when stores were quieter. Long walks along the Hudson. Takeout containers covering Evan's coffee table while Ryan complained about board presentations and Evan corrected financial assumptions Ryan insisted were already perfect. Evan refused expensive gifts, so Ryan learned to choose things that meant something instead. A used first edition of a novel Evan loved. A fountain pen from a small shop in Brooklyn. A framed photograph of the Maine coastline after Evan once admitted he wanted to see it in winter. In return, Evan gave Ryan something money had never purchased for him, a place where expectations stopped at the door. Yet there were moments when Ryan sensed another locked door inside Evan. One Sunday evening, Evan's phone rang while they were making dinner. He glanced at the screen and immediately walked into the bedroom. Ryan heard only fragments through the closed door. I understand. Then, no. I have not changed my mind. A pause followed. Tell Charles the first need more time. When Evan returned, Ryan was stirring pasta sauce. Everything okay? Family. Your mother? Evan hesitated. Not exactly. Ryan waited for more. None came. You know you can tell me things. Evan's expression softened. I know. But some things are complicated before they become mine to explain. Ryan frowned. That sounds like something an attorney would say. Evan smiled. Faintly. Maybe I should have gone to law school. Ryan let the subject go. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who treated privacy as suspicious, and he refused to do that to Evan. What Ryan did not know was that Charles was Charles Sterling, Evan's maternal grandfather, and the calls had become more frequent because Sterling Holdings was approaching a succession decision Evan had avoided for years. Evan had grown up using his father's surname, Brooks, after his mother left the Sterling family. He had built a career without their money and without their influence because he wanted proof that he could become someone before inheritance decided who he was. Then Charles became ill and began asking Evan to return. Evan said no twice. The third time, he agreed only to listen. Months passed. Ryan noticed occasional changes. Evan disappeared for Saturday meetings he described as family obligations. He began reading reports about Sterling Holdings late at night. Once, Ryan found a thick folder on Evan's desk stamped confidential. Evan closed it before Ryan could see the first page. Work? Ryan asked. Evan held his gaze for a second. Something like that. It was the closest Evan came to a lie, and even then he hated himself for it. On the night before their relationship reached 11 months, they stood by Ryan's apartment window overlooking Manhattan. Ryan wrapped an arm lightly around Evan's shoulders. My father is negotiating with Sterling Holdings, he said. Evan went completely still. Ryan did not notice. Apparently, it could be the biggest partnership we have done in years. When? Evan asked. Private dinner next Thursday. Evan stared at the city lights. Ryan, there is something I need to tell you. Ryan turned toward him. Evan's phone began ringing on the table. The screen displayed a name Ryan could not see from where he stood. Evan looked at it, then back at Ryan. For several seconds, he seemed ready to ignore the call. Finally, he stepped away. I have to take this. Ryan nodded. Evan answered quietly. Hello, Charles. By the time he returned, Ryan had been called into an emergency conference with his father. The conversation never happened. 1 week later, Ryan would walk into a private dining room expecting to negotiate with strangers and find the man he loved already sitting among them. The private dining room looked exactly as Ryan remembered it from less than an hour earlier, but nothing about the table felt the same. The sterling crest on Evan's document had transformed every detail Ryan had dismissed into evidence of a life he had never been allowed to see. Charles Sterling resumed the discussion as though nothing unusual had happened. William Hayes reviewed projected returns. Attorneys compared clauses. Evan sat across from Ryan with the same composed expression he used at Hayes Capital when presenting an analysis to senior managers. Only his eyes betrayed the tension. Ryan forced himself to concentrate. Whatever explanation Evan owed him would have to wait until they were alone. There is one remaining issue, Charles said. Governance. A Sterling attorney distributed revised documents. Ryan studied the proposal. You increased the independent review requirement. At my recommendation, Evans said. William looked toward him. You seem unusually invested in the structure for someone attending as an advisor. Charles glanced at Evan before answering. Mr. Brooks has reasons to care about Sterling's long-term stability. Ryan heard the careful wording. Another answer that explained nothing while technically avoiding a lie. And what exactly is Mr. Brooks's role here? Ryan asked. His father gave him a questioning look. Ryan kept his expression professional. Charles folded his hands. That will become clear shortly. Evan lowered his gaze. Ryan felt frustration rise, but refused to show it. He turned to the proposal instead. The 15% threshold is reasonable, but the review committee cannot be controlled by either company. Evan looked up. Agreed. Then each side appoints one member, and the third is selected independently. With unanimous approval, Evan added. Otherwise, the supposedly independent seat becomes another negotiation. Ryan almost smiled despite himself. This was familiar. This was how they argued over financial models at midnight, except now 10 other people were watching. William leaned back in his chair. You two seem to think similarly. Evan answered before Ryan could. Good analysis tends to converge. The words were neutral. Ryan knew Evan well enough to hear the nervousness underneath them. Charles called for another short recess while the attorneys revised the language. This time, Evan stood first. Ryan followed him into the corridor. Do not ask me to wait another hour, Ryan said quietly. Evan stopped near the windows. Manhattan stretched below them in thousands of lights. I was going to tell you last week. You had 11 months. For most of those 11 months, there was nothing decided to tell. There was a family. Evan looked at him. Yes. A family named Sterling. Yes. Ryan exhaled slowly. When I told you my father was negotiating with them, you already knew. I knew Charles wanted me at this dinner. I did not know exactly what he intended to announce. Charles. Ryan repeated the name. The man you kept taking calls from. Evan nodded. My grandfather. Ryan looked away toward the city. The answer was simple, but it changed everything. Why did you let me believe you had no connection to them? Because I spent most of my life trying not to have one. Evan's voice remained controlled. My mother left that family when I was young. I grew up as Evan Brooks. I went to school as Evan Brooks. I applied to Hayes Capital without Sterling money, Sterling references, or Sterling connections. Everything you know about me is real, except the part you decided I did not deserve to know. Evan flinched at that. That is fair. Ryan had expected an argument. The admission unsettled him more. Then explain it. Charles has been asking me to return for months. I kept refusing. When his health changed, he asked me to at least hear what the family was proposing. I agreed. And tonight is supposed to settle it. Settle what? The dining room door opened before Evan could answer. The Sterling attorney appeared again. Mr. Brooks, Mr. Sterling needs you. Ryan gave a humorless breath. Of course he does. Evan remained where he was. Ryan, listen to me. I did not meet you because of this deal. I did not take the job at Hayes because of Sterling. When we met, I wanted nothing from either family except distance. But you knew who I was from the first day. Yes. And you never thought your connection to Sterling might matter? I thought if I told you, I would stop being Evan and become a Sterling before I had even decided whether I wanted that name. Ryan stared at him. You did not trust me to see the difference. Evan's expression softened with regret. I was afraid you would. That answer followed Ryan back into the dining room. Everyone returned to their seats. The revised documents were waiting. This time, a second folder rested in front of Evan, sealed with dark blue wax bearing the Sterling emblem. Charles did not immediately discuss the partnership. Instead, he looked around the table. Before we continue, there is a family matter that affects the governance structure and therefore must be disclosed to Hayes Capital. Evan became perfectly still. Ryan watched Charles place one hand on the sealed folder. For decades, Sterling Holdings has maintained voting control through a family trust. My daughter, Catherine, relinquished her active role many years ago, but her rights under the trust were never extinguished. William frowned. I was not aware Catherine Sterling had retained an interest. Very few people were. Charles turned toward Evan. Ryan felt the room shift before another word was spoken. Those rights passed through her son. William followed Charles's gaze. Every person at the table did the same. Evan looked directly at Ryan. Charles slid the folder toward him. Evan Sterling Brooks. Hearing the full name aloud struck differently than seeing part of it printed on a page. Ryan said nothing. Charles continued. My grandson. The silence around the table became absolute. Evan placed his hand on the folder but did not open it. Ryan finally understood why Sterling attorneys deferred to him, why Charles asked for his opinion, and why Evan had been invited to a negotiation far above the position listed on his Hayes Capital employment record. But one question remained larger than all the others. Ryan looked at the sealed succession documents beneath Evan's hand and realized the man sitting across from him was not merely connected to Sterling Holdings. Whatever was inside that folder was about to determine who Evan would become. The sealed folder remained beneath Evan's hand while everyone at the table waited for Charles Sterling to continue. Ryan had spent his entire career learning how to remain composed when negotiations changed without warning, but this was not a negotiation anymore. This was the man he loved sitting across from him with an identity Ryan had never known. Charles turned toward William Hayes. The trust established by my father divided voting rights among direct descendants. Catherine retained her beneficial interest when she left the company, and Evan inherited her position under the trust. William looked from Charles to Evan. And Hayes Capital was informed tonight because the documents in that folder concerned the future control of Sterling Holdings. Ryan felt the meaning before Charles explained it. Evan opened the folder slowly. Inside were legal documents, a letter, and several pages marked for signature. Charles continued, "My current voting authority will transfer when I step down. The trust permits me to designate a successor from the eligible family members." Evan looked at his grandfather. "You told me this was a discussion." "It is. This looks like a decision. Only if you accept it." Ryan watched Evan read the first page. For the first time that evening, the calm expression disappeared. "You named me." Charles nodded. "I did." William leaned back, visibly reassessing the entire room. "So Mr. Brooks is not simply a beneficiary." "No," Charles said. "If he accepts, he will become the controlling family representative under the trust." Ryan looked at Evan. 11 months earlier, Evan had been the junior analyst who joked about a broken coffee machine. Now a room full of executives was waiting to learn whether he would become one of the most influential people at Sterling Holdings. Yet Evan did not look triumphant. He looked trapped. "I need time," Evan said. Charles's expression remained patient. "You have had months." "I had months to consider. Returning to the family. That is not the same as agreeing to lead it." William glanced toward Ryan. "Did you know about any of this?" The question was simple. Ryan knew Evan heard the accusation hidden beneath it. "No, nothing. I learned Evan was Charles Sterling's grandson about 5 minutes before you did." Evan looked at him, regret passing across his face. William's attention sharpened. "You call him Evan as though you know him well." Ryan felt the room become dangerous in an entirely different way. At work, Ryan called junior analysts by their first names all the time. There was nothing unusual about it. Yet his father's instincts had caught the familiarity in his voice. Evan intervened. "I work at Hayes Capital. Mr. Hayes and I have discussed several projects." Technically true. Ryan hated hearing it. William accepted the explanation for the moment, but Charles did not appear convinced. "Interesting," Charles said. Ryan turned toward him. "What is?" Evan refused every Sterling position I offered because he wanted to build a career independently. Somehow he chose your company. "I applied there before I knew Ryan personally," Evan said. Charles's eyes moved between them. "I did not suggest otherwise." The conversation returned to the partnership, but trust had changed shape. Ryan found himself questioning details he would never have questioned that morning. Had Evan known Sterling was considering a Hayes partnership before joining the company? Had their first elevator meeting truly been accidental? Had every conversation about powerful families contained a second meaning Ryan was never meant to understand? By the time another recess was called, Ryan's doubt had become impossible to ignore. He walked into the corridor without asking Evan to follow. Evan followed anyway. "Say it," Evan said. Ryan turned. "Say what?" "Whatever you have been thinking for the last 20 minutes. Ryan kept his voice low. "Did you know Sterling was interested in Hayes when you applied for your job?" "No." "Did Charles ask you to work there?" "No." "Did anyone in your family?" "No." "Did you meet me because of this deal?" Evan's expression hardened. "No." Ryan looked toward the closed dining room doors. "I want to believe you." "Then believe me. You hid an entire family. And you hid me." Ryan went silent. Evan immediately looked as though he wished he could take the words back, but he continued. "I am not saying those things are equal. They are not. I should have told you sooner. But every time we walked into Hayes Capital, I became someone you could barely acknowledge. Every time we saw someone you knew in public, we created distance. You said it was to protect us. It was. And I told myself the same thing about Sterling." Ryan shook his head. "I never lied about who I was." "Neither did I. My name is Evan Brooks. That is the name I grew up with. Sterling is part of my family history, but it was never the part one wanted defining me." Ryan looked at him. "Until tonight." Evan glanced through the glass toward the city. "I did not know Charles was naming me successor tonight. But you knew it was possible." Evan hesitated. That hesitation hurt more than any answer. "Yes." Ryan exhaled slowly. "You should have told me." "I know." The anger in Ryan weakened because Evan was not defending the mistake. "Why did you not?" Evan's voice became quieter. "Because I knew exactly what would happen the moment you heard Sterling. You would look at me differently." Ryan wanted to deny it, but he had spent the entire evening doing exactly that. Before he could answer, the dining room door opened. Charles stood there. "Evan, we need your decision on whether you will accept the trust designation before negotiations continue." Evan looked at Ryan, then back at his grandfather. "Fine." They returned to the table. Evan took his seat and placed both hands beside the succession documents. Charles waited. William waited. The attorneys waited. Ryan watched Evan pick up the pen. Then Evan set it down again. Before I decide anything, he said, there is something everyone at this table needs to understand. Ryan's pulse quickened. Evan looked directly at him. For the first time that night, there was no silent warning in his eyes telling Ryan to pretend they were strangers. There was only a choice neither of them had planned to make. Evan kept his hands beside the unsigned documents, but the confession Ryan expected did not come. Instead, Evan looked at Charles. If I accept the trust designation, I need to know exactly what authority comes with it. Charles studied him for a moment. Voting control over the family trust, a seat on the Sterling board, and the responsibility to represent the family's controlling interest. Including this partnership? Yes. Evan nodded slowly. Then I cannot participate in the final decision on the Hayes agreement. William Hayes frowned. Why not? Evan turned toward him. Because I currently work for Hayes Capital. Even if my position is junior, accepting control of Sterling while voting on a transaction involving my employer creates a conflict that should be disclosed and independently reviewed. One of the Sterling attorneys gave a small nod. That would be the appropriate approach. Charles looked almost pleased. You have not accepted yet. I know. Evan looked down at the papers. But if I do, I want the rules established before anyone can accuse either company of receiving an unfair advantage. Ryan understood what Evan was doing. Faced with unexpected power, he was not reaching for it. He was creating boundaries around it. That was the Evan Ryan knew. William leaned toward the table. There is another issue. Mr. Brooks has had access to internal Hayes information for nearly a year. Only information appropriate to my role, Evan said. My access history can be audited. It will be. Good. Evan's answer came without defensiveness. Ryan watched his father carefully. William respected confidence, but he trusted documentation more. Evan seemed to understand that instinctively. Charles slid the succession letter closer. You asked for proof that you could build a life without Sterling. You did. You asked me not to interfere with your career. I did not. What remains is whether you are willing to help shape what this family becomes after me. Evan read the final page again. Ryan remembered every unexplained Saturday meeting and every call from Charles. Suddenly, they no longer looked like pieces of some hidden strategy. They looked like a man resisting a future he had never asked for. If I accept, Evan said, I remain Evan Brooks professionally until the transition is publicly disclosed. I choose when and how I use the Sterling name. My mother is not pulled back into company life unless she wants it. And an independent committee handles the Hayes transaction. Charles considered each condition. Agreed. Evan picked up the pen. Ryan felt an unexpected ache in his chest. The signature would change Evan's life, but Ryan realized the change had nothing to do with becoming wealthy or powerful. Evan had inherited those possibilities long before tonight. What mattered was that he was finally choosing whether to carry them. Evan signed. The attorney collected the page and placed it in a separate folder. Charles extended his hand across the table. Welcome home. Evan looked at the offered hand, then shook it. Do not make me regret this. Charles smiled faintly. There is the Sterling stubbornness. My mother calls it Brooks' stubbornness. A few people laughed, and the tension eased for the first time all evening. Ryan almost did too. Then William spoke. There is still something I do not understand. The room quieted. What is that? Charles asked. William looked directly at Evan. My son recognized you the moment he entered this room. Ryan felt his stomach tighten. Evan remained composed. We work in the same building. Hayes Capital employs more than 2,000 people in Manhattan. Ryan does not recognize every junior analyst before an introduction. Ryan said, Father. William ignored the warning. During the recess, you followed each other into the corridor. When Charles announced your identity, Ryan looked surprised, but not surprised to see you here. He looked betrayed. Evan's expression changed slightly. Charles turned toward Ryan. How well do you know my grandson? There it was. The question they had avoided for 11 months. Ryan looked at Evan. Their rule returned to him with painful clarity. Private, not shameful. It had sounded simple in Evan's kitchen. Now privacy had become something else. Silence here would not protect them. It would become another lie. Ryan opened his mouth, but Evan spoke first. Before we answer that, I want one thing clear. Ryan did not know I was Charles Sterling's grandson. He did not know about the trust. He did not know I might become Sterling's successor. Whatever anyone thinks after tonight, that part is not open to interpretation. William's gaze sharpened. Why are you defending him? Evan looked at Ryan. Because he deserves the truth. Ryan felt the entire table waiting. Charles's eyes moved between them. Then perhaps someone should finally tell us what the truth is. Evan took a slow breath. Ryan recognized the nervous habit. He had seen it before difficult conversations, before presentations, before the first time Evan had admitted that what they were doing was no longer casual. Ryan gave the smallest nod. Whatever happened next, Evan would not face it alone. Evan turned back to the table. Ryan and I have been together for 11 months. Nobody spoke. William stared at his son. Charles stared at Evan. One attorney slowly lowered his pen. Ryan could hear the muted traffic 42 floors below. Then William asked the question Ryan had known would come. Did you begin this relationship before or after Sterling approached us about the partnership? Ryan answered immediately. Before. Charles looked at Evan. How long before? Evan calculated. Nearly 8 months. William's expression did not soften. And we are expected to accept that this is a coincidence. Ryan leaned forward. You can verify it. Evan glanced at him. Ryan continued. Our first dinner receipt. Messages. Calendar records. His employment application. Sterling's initial contact with Hayes. The dates will establish the sequence without exposing anything private. Evan understood immediately. And my application predates my first meeting with Ryan. Charles looked toward his attorney. The attorney nodded. All of that can be independently confirmed. William remained silent. Evan reached for the succession folder, but instead of pulling it toward himself, he pushed it to the center of the table. Then confirm it. Audit my Hayes access. Review the timeline. Remove me from the partnership vote. I will accept every reasonable safeguard. He looked first at Charles, then William, and finally Ryan. But I will not pretend I do not know him anymore. Ryan held his gaze. 11 months of careful distance had ended with one sentence. The secret heir had been revealed. Their relationship had been revealed. And now everyone at the table had to decide which truth frightened them more. For several seconds after Evan spoke, nobody at the table seemed willing to be the first person to react. Ryan had expected surprise. He had expected questions. What he had not expected was the strange relief of finally sitting beside the truth instead of protecting it from everyone in the room. William Hayes broke the silence. 11 months. Ryan nodded. Yes. You concealed a relationship with an employee for 11 months. We kept a personal relationship private. That distinction will not matter to the board. Evan answered before Ryan could. Then the board should review it. William turned toward him. You seem remarkably comfortable inviting investigations tonight. Because facts are easier to defend than assumptions. Charles Sterling leaned back, watching his grandson with an expression Ryan could not read. And what assumption concerns you most? Evan looked around the table. That Ryan pursued me because of Sterling, or that I joined Hayes Capital to gain access to him. Neither is true. One of the attorneys opened a laptop. The employment records can establish when Mr. Brooks applied and when Sterling first approached Hayes about the partnership. William nodded. Do it. Ryan felt Evan glance toward him. Months earlier, those 2 words from his father might have frightened him. Tonight they sounded almost welcome. Verification meant the truth would finally have something stronger than emotion behind it. The attorney reviewed the records while dinner sat forgotten around them. Evan's application to Hayes Capital had been submitted 14 months earlier. His transfer into strategic research happened 12 months earlier. His first documented personal dinner with Ryan occurred 11 months earlier. Sterling Holdings had formally contacted Hayes Capital about a possible partnership only 3 months ago. Charles looked toward William. That answers one question. William remained cautious. Not all of them. No, Evan said. So asked the rest. Ryan recognized the shift immediately. Evan was no longer the quiet analyst trying to keep 2 identities separate. He was beginning to occupy the authority Charles had offered him, not through arrogance, but through control of his own story. William looked at his son. Did you influence Evan's hiring? No. Promotions? No. Compensation? No. Assignments? Never without his manager involved. Evan added, my performance reviews were completed independently. The attorney confirmed that as well. William finally leaned back. Then the relationship itself remains a disclosure issue. Ryan nodded. I agree. Evan looked surprised. Ryan continued. We should have disclosed it once it became serious. I thought keeping it private protected Evan from being treated differently because of me. I can see now that secrecy created its own problem. Evan's expression softened. That was my mistake too. Charles tapped one finger against the table. You both seem eager to accept blame. That is unusual in rooms like this. Maybe that is why rooms like this have so many problems, Evan replied. Charles almost smiled. William did not. There is still the Sterling succession. If Evan accepts voting control, Ryan will eventually lead Hayes Capital while his partner represents Sterling. These companies compete. Then we establish boundaries before either transition is complete, Ryan said. Independent review committees. Mandatory recusals on transactions involving both firms. Separate confidential information protocols. Evan nodded. And I leave Hayes Capital. Ryan turned toward him. That part had not been discussed. Evan, I cannot remain an analyst at Hayes while representing Sterling. It is not fair to either company. Ryan knew he was right, but hearing it still felt like losing one of the ordinary pieces of their life. Evan gave him a small look that said they would discuss it later. Charles folded his hands. You sound as though you have already accepted the responsibility. Evan looked at the sign designation. I accepted the trust. Position. Now I need to prove I deserve it. William's attention shifted to Ryan. And you understand that your future at Hayes will be reviewed separately from your relationship? It should be. Ryan's answer came easily. I do not want the chief executive position because I am your son. I want it if the board believes I am qualified. William studied him for a long moment. Something in his expression changed, not approval exactly, but recognition. The meeting resumed shortly after 10. This time, Evan moved from the advisor's seat to the position beside Charles. Ryan remained opposite him. The physical distance was the same, yet everything else had changed. They no longer needed to pretend that every glance was accidental. Near midnight, the attorneys agreed to suspend final partnership approval until independent reviews were completed. People began collecting folders and closing laptops. Ryan stood and reached for his coat. Evan approached him openly. William and Charles were still only a few feet away. Are you angry with me? Evan asked quietly. Ryan considered the question. About Sterling? Yes. Evan nodded. Fair. About tonight? No. That is surprisingly reasonable for an alpha who spent dinner discovering his boyfriend has a second last name and a controlling trust. Ryan finally smiled. I am having a complicated evening. Evan smiled back. Then Charles spoke from behind them. Ryan. Ryan turned. The older man looked directly at him. Tomorrow morning, the Sterling board will ask whether you knew about Evan's inheritance before tonight. Ryan met his gaze. I will tell them the truth. Charles nodded. Good. Because if they believe otherwise, this partnership is finished. William added. And the Hayes board will be asking its own questions. Ryan looked at Evan. The secret was gone, but the consequences had only begun. Evan reached for his coat. As they walked toward the elevator together, he stopped pretending there needed to be several feet between them. By 8:30 the next morning, Ryan was seated before a special committee of the Hayes Capital Board, while Evan sat 12 blocks away, answering nearly identical questions from Sterling. Directors. Their private life had become a corporate timeline measured in employment records, calendar entries, expense receipts, access logs, and disclosure policies. Ryan answered every question without attempting to make the relationship sound smaller than it was. He explained when he met Evan, when they began dating, and why they had kept the relationship private. When a director asked whether Evan had ever shared confidential Sterling information with him, Ryan answered immediately. No. Did you know he had access to Sterling information? No. Did he influence the proposed partnership? Not through me. The committee chair studied Ryan. And if maintaining this relationship complicates your succession? Ryan paused only long enough to understand what was truly being asked. Then evaluate my succession on my judgment and performance. Do not ask me to turn another person into the price of proving I deserve my position. Across Manhattan, Evan faced a harder accusation. A Sterling director placed a copy of his Hayes employment history on the table. You expect us to believe the grandson of Charles Sterling accidentally took a job at the company we later selected for a major partnership? Yes, because that is what happened. And accidentally began dating its heir? Evan remained composed. I did not know Ryan personally when I joined Hayes. Sterling did not approach Hayes about this partnership until months after Ryan and I began seeing each other. Convenient. Charles started to speak, but Evan raised a hand gently. Let me answer. He opened the folder he had brought with him. My application date is here. My hiring records are here. My access history is here. You can also review every file I opened while employed at Hayes Capital. If you find evidence that I used that position for Sterling, I will decline the trust designation." The room went silent. Charles looked at him sharply. "Evan, if I am going to represent this family, my first decision cannot be asking everyone to trust me without evidence." The director leaned forward. "And if the audit clears you, then I accept the responsibility under conditions that protect both companies." By noon, Evans submitted his resignation from Hayes Capital. He declined severance beyond what company policy required and requested that his access be terminated immediately. Ryan learned about it through the committee rather than from Evan. For a moment, it hurt. Then his phone vibrated during the recess. Evan had sent a message. "I wanted to tell you myself. They asked me to submit it immediately." Ryan replied, "I know. Are you okay?" Evan's answer arrived seconds later. "Ask me after coffee." Ryan smiled for the first time that day. The investigations continued for 3 weeks. Every significant date supported the same conclusion. Evan had applied to Hayes before Sterling considered the partnership. His relationship with Ryan began months before negotiations. His work access showed no improper searches, and Ryan had never intervened in Evan's compensation or advancement. More unexpectedly, the review discovered that Evan had once recommended against a Hayes proposal that would have benefited Sterling because he believed the assumptions were unsound. The evidence did not merely clear them. It demonstrated that both men had repeatedly kept professional judgment separate from personal loyalty. The partnership returned to consideration under a new structure. Evan formally recused himself from all Sterling votes involving Hayes Capital. Ryan did the same on the Hayes side. Independent committees received authority over negotiations, and both companies established information barriers that neither man could bypass. On the morning the revised agreement went before the boards, Ryan and Evan met at the small coffee shop where they had spent many mornings pretending they had arrived separately. Evan was already seated when Ryan entered. "You look terrible," Evan said. "Good morning to you too. I mean professionally terrible. Very executive." Ryan sat across from him. "My board votes in 40 minutes. Mine in 50. Ryan studied him. "Nervous? About the vote?" "A little." Evan wrapped both hands around his coffee. "About us?" "Less than I expected." Ryan became quiet. "I was angry that you did not tell me about Sterling." "I know. I am still angry. I know that too. But I understand why you were afraid." Evan looked at him. "And I understand why you thought hiding us was protection." Ryan gave a small smile. "We were both very good at protecting things until nobody could see them." Evan laughed softly. "That sounds accurate." Ryan reached across the table and rested his hand beside Evan's. Not touching, just close. The old habit made Evan notice immediately. "You know nobody here cares anymore," Evan said. Ryan looked around. 2 people worked on laptops. A barista called out an order. Nobody was watching them. "I know." Evan moved his hand the final inch and linked their fingers. The gesture was simple enough to be invisible to everyone except them. Ryan looked down, then back at him. "Coffee after the votes?" "Only if you are buying. You are a Sterling heir. And you are an alpha heir. I fail to see how either fact changes your responsibility for coffee." Ryan laughed. His phone rang before he could answer. William's name appeared on the screen. Ryan accepted the call. He listened for several seconds, then looked at Evan. The Hayes board approved the independent structure. Evan's expression brightened, but his own phone rang almost immediately. "Charles." Evan answered. Ryan watched his face as he listened. Then Evan slowly smiled. Sterling had approved it too. For months, both families had treated their relationship as a threat to the deal. In the end, the deal survived because Ryan and Evan had chosen not to control it. Evan ended the call and looked at Ryan. "So what happens now?" Ryan glanced at their joined hands resting openly on the table. "Now we find out what life looks like when neither of us has to pretend." 6 months later, Ryan arrived at the Sterling Foundation charity dinner 10 minutes late and discovered his name card beside Evan's. He stopped at the edge of the table and smiled. The arrangement was so ordinary that nobody else seemed to notice what it meant. Months earlier, sitting across from Evan at another formal dinner had changed everything Ryan thought he knew. Tonight, there was no carefully measured distance, no introduction between supposed strangers, and no reason to hide recognition when Evan looked up. "You are late," Evan said. 7 minutes. 10. Manhattan traffic. You walked from 3 blocks away. Ryan pulled out the chair beside him. You have become difficult since joining the Sterling board. I was difficult before that. True. Evan handed him the dinner program, and Ryan noticed the name printed beneath his boyfriend's photograph. Evan Sterling Brooks, Sterling Holdings board representative. Evan had eventually chosen to use both family names publicly. Brooks honored the life his mother had built away from Sterling influence. Sterling acknowledged the responsibility he had decided to accept on his own terms. The transition had not transformed him into the person newspapers expected an heir to become. He still took the subway when traffic was terrible, still bought coffee from the same neighborhood shop, and still considered $20 excessive for room service pancakes. Ryan loved that success had changed Evan's schedule without changing the reasons he laughed. Ryan's own life had shifted too. The Hayes board had formally approved his succession plan, although William remained chief executive officer during the transition. Father and son disagreed frequently, but their conversations had become less about obedience and more about judgment. William had never offered a dramatic apology for questioning Evan. Instead, he began inviting Evan to family dinners. The first invitation had been awkward. The second had been easier. By the fourth, William had asked Evan to explain why Ryan consistently ordered terrible wine, and Evan had answered with enough detail to embarrass Ryan for the rest of dinner. Charles Sterling adapted differently. Once Evan accepted the trust responsibility, Charles began sending him decades of company records with handwritten notes in the margins. Evan complained about the workload and kept every note. Their relationship remained complicated, but it was finally theirs to define. The partnership between Hayes and Sterling moved forward through independent committees. Ryan and Evan received the same reports as other senior leaders only after decisions entered the appropriate review stages. When either company discussed matters involving the other, one of them stepped away. Financial reporters initially treated their relationship like an approaching corporate crisis. Eventually, the absence of scandal became less interesting than the businesses themselves. Dinner began. Conversations moved around the table, touching on charitable grants, market forecasts, and a new scholarship program Evan had proposed for students without family connections in finance. Ryan listened as Evan explained the program to an older donor. 11 months ago, Ryan had thought he was protecting a junior analyst from the world attached to the Hayes name. Now he understood that Evan had never needed rescuing. He had needed the freedom to choose which world he wanted to belong to. Later, dessert arrived. Ryan looked at the chocolate cake in front of Evan. You ordered that? Yes. You told me you did not like chocolate cake. I told you I did not like the chocolate cake at that restaurant in Brooklyn. Ryan stared at him. I have spent almost a year believing you dislike chocolate cake. Evan took a bite. Apparently, we still have secrets. Ryan laughed. It was the kind of small discovery that once would have frightened him. Now it felt like a promise that knowing someone was not a destination reached after 11 months or 11 years. There would always be another preference, another memory, another ordinary detail waiting to be learned. When the dinner ended, they walked outside together. A light spring rain had started over Manhattan. Ryan opened an umbrella. Evan looked at it with exaggerated surprise. You remembered one. I am capable of personal growth. This is significant progress. They walked toward home beneath the same umbrella, shoulders occasionally brushing as taxis moved along the wet avenue. Their apartment was only 6 blocks away. Evan had moved in 2 months earlier, bringing too many books, 3 coffee mugs he refused to replace, and the extra umbrella Ryan had forgotten at his old apartment countless times. Their future still contained board meetings, family expectations, difficult decisions, and 2 companies that would sometimes stand on opposite sides of a negotiation. Neither man expected love to make those realities disappear. It simply meant they no longer had to disappear from each other's lives whenever those realities became complicated. On Sunday morning, Ryan woke first and made coffee. Evan appeared in the kitchen wearing an old college sweatshirt and carrying 2 folders he had promised not to open until Monday. Ryan pointed at them. No work. Evan placed them on a chair. I was moving them toward the kitchen table. Coincidence. Ryan poured his coffee. Outside, sunlight reached between the buildings and filled the apartment windows. Evan stood beside him, quiet for a moment. Do you ever think about that dinner? He asked. The first one. The table. Ryan smiled. Sometimes. Evan looked down at their 2 coffee cups. I thought everything was going to fall apart. So did I. Instead, everyone finally learned who we were. Ryan reached for Evan's hand, including us. Evan threaded their fingers together. Nothing dramatic followed. No announcement. No board vote. No inheritance documents waiting for signatures. Just coffee growing cold, Sunday sunlight across the floor, 2 unopened work folders on a chair, and a day with nowhere they needed to pretend to be strangers. Their future was still unwritten, but for the first time, they were allowed to write it together.